occasionally do, have experiences for sure where you're like, oh my gosh, like you just said what I was thinking. This happens all the time with my husband. It's kind of to the point of being kind of creepy every once in a while. But in terms of utilizing that then for their relationship, I think it only serves to strengthen it, to allow for them to realize that they're on, my family always use on the same wavelength. And I don't know if I'd have any advice with people that could do that, except that lean into it. It makes things fun, really. It makes things interesting. And also, in a lot of instances, demonstrates to individuals that like there's maybe more there than they're realizing.
Welcome to Connecting with Coincidence. I am your host, Bernard Beitman, MD, and I study synchronicity, meaningful coincidences, but I'm very much lately interested in intention and how intention affects the reticular activating system of our brains and how the reticular activating system filters information in directions that our intentions help us to pay attention to out there so that we can, by intention, set the RAS to filter the kinds of information we want to get. And that tends to focus and create synchronicities between mind and external events. Please notice my book in the back, Meaningful Coincidences, and please like this video and send me messages and subscribe. I like responding to the messages. Sometimes they're very, very interesting, and it helps tickle the algorithm in the direction of getting us more out there. Well, our guest today is Meradeth Houston, who lives in Montana, and she's also an anthropology professor and scientist. She specializes in really old DNA that's decayed, and runs 2 laboratories, and gets into, and I think from what she's telling me, she gets into trouble, and tries to, and kind of looks for that trouble when she's doing stuff with her students and interns and maybe other people, and they create some shenanigans in that environment. She likes to have a good time, as you will be able to see. Stories are her passion, and she can't live without them. She's especially attracted to tweaks to the real world. Like she puts a little magic in, so this is like this a little surreal, but it's probably the kind of magic that's lying behind our regular reality that she's playing with. I think you'll see that in our discussion of interpersonal telepathy. The stories give a little extra boost to science that already exists, a little something beyond our day-to-day reality. And I don't think what we'll talk about today is that far beyond our everyday reality. Her stories integrate these themes, and she loves getting powerful females who love to get the job done. I mean, that is central to this book, The Coincidence Makers, which is what I have just recently read, and we'll have some discussion about, is a very guilty a woman who really likes the guy that she's hanging around with, and has been hanging around with this guy for like centuries. They just have been doing a lot of adventures together, and in this one in San Francisco, they get together and they eat at a restaurant that I ate at in San Francisco, so I could identify with what she was talking about. So, Meredith, welcome to the show, and thanks for sending me your book. It was a lot of fun to read. It was hard to put it down. I really liked it, going through it and seeing what adventure was going to happen next. So,
Yeah,
Welcome.
thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad to hear that you enjoyed it. Definitely. There are two more, I will say, that are coming out in what is it, May and June. So hopefully if anybody wants to wander down the coincidence maker's path, I definitely very much enjoyed writing these. And yeah, I really love the San Francisco setting because I grew up just outside of San Francisco, and I've actually never eaten at that restaurant. But I walked by it so many times, I was like, oh, this has to make it in here. So
It's pretty expensive. Greens is one of the most expensive vegetarian restaurants you can find in
yeah,
any
yeah.
place. And it's lasted a long time because I was there several decades ago.
I'm always surprised at how long it's been there. Especially since vegetarianism always strikes me as something a little bit more recent, but it isn't. But yeah,
It
no,
was there.
it's
It
a pretty
was
cool
there
place.
back there when I was being a hippies. So why don't you tell us a degraded DNA story?
Okay. So yes, my day job is as a professor, and I run an ancient DNA laboratory, and a modern DNA laboratory. So that's the other one. And I specialize in working with different populations for establishing identity of individuals, as well as doing population studies when I have permission. So one individual was championing, basically attempting to ensure that some individuals who had been looted out of it was a pay to dig situation in the 50s in Texas. And Texas has some interesting land laws in terms of allowing for individuals, like if they own the property that an archaeological site is on, you can go in and do whatever you want with it, basically. And the landowner in the 50s had said, okay, well, if you want to pay me like $50, I'll let you go in for the day and you can keep anything that you dig out of this cave. I'm not going to give names just for privacy's sake of the individuals and the site itself. There is actually a really cool article, though, in the New Yorker from, gosh, a few months ago now, if anybody wants to wander down that path. But what ended up happening is that there was at least three individuals, and we think probably closer to seven, that had been interred in the cave, and they were dug out by individuals. Um, some of them in situations that were pretty hard to swallow for individuals who want to respect the dead, and placed in these really odd situations around the state of Texas and outside of there. And so the individual was championing basically being able to go back and find these individuals and ensure that they came from this cave and then be able to give them a proper burial. Um, got a hold of a collaborator of mine, and they were able to locate a few of these through all sorts of this crazy paperwork trail. Like they found who three of them were, and then got permission to do DNA testing. And I was the one that was contacted for that. So I did some work on a couple of tiny pieces of bone that were approved by the tribes to look at, and pulled on a maternal matriline. It's actually pretty rare. It's a mouthful. It's B2A4A1. It's a maternal lineage. And I was able then to report that back. And actually, as I sent that off to my collaborator who had been an academic trying to find these individuals, he had the tribal member who had been championing this all this time in his office. And they read this off, and apparently the tribal member just like burst into tears and was like, that's my lineage. And actually, when they compared them, they were nearly identical. And I actually have compared to all the other instances I've been able to get my hands on of this particular maternal lineage. Actually, I've had lots of people contact me, and I've run their DNA comparisons and kind of show them how their maternal lineage is related to these individuals. And it's been really quite fascinating. But the fact that this person was really like pushing this for years to ensure that uh, cave and the individuals that had been interred there were given the respect that they're due, and that it turned out that they were literally his maternal lineage path and from the past. Like it was just mind-blowing to me. I was in the airport when they called and told me this, and I just like had to sit down and cry for a while. It was just really, really moving. And I was in Texas, gosh, 2 weekends ago for the reinterment ceremony. So it was really powerful, really important for me personally, just to be able to witness this ability to get people back where they belong, and to be able to know that they're there with their family. And I think that that was pretty dang cool and a pretty wild coincidence. The probability of that is so low. So I really, really enjoyed that scenario, and found a great meaning in it. Speaking of meaningful coincidences, so
What meaning did you find in it?
um, that I that the work that I'm doing has a big purpose, I guess. Really, sometimes I wonder and I worry that like what I'm doing, because there are plenty of people that really don't want their DNA done, they don't want this sort of work completed, um, that they are very against it for a variety of reasons that are valid in their own way. Uh, and there are days when I just kind of I struggle with like what I do. Am I doing the right thing? Um, is this appropriate? Is this the what I should be doing with my life? But this really gave me a lot of purpose, I feel like, and a lot of knowledge that what is going on sometimes is bigger than myself, and that this was an instance definitely where that was the case. This was very much something that I believe really needed to happen. That these individuals deserved the treatment of being able to be pulled from glass cases and underneath stairwells and also to these kind of awful places where they had been stashed basically, and returned to their families. So, I feel like that's important, especially in my line of work. I work with the dead a lot, so that is something that I felt was very, very meaningful to me. Yeah,
Yeah, it's being able to bring the bones and the DNA back to where they needed to be.
yeah,
And you were
definitely.
able to facilitate that. Now, just to repeat it again, this man was able to recognize somehow his own DNA.
Yeah,
He,
somehow or another, that was I don't know how. I think that honestly, in some ways, is probably the ancestors, through their DNA or however that is, was definitely um pushing him. So,
so your view somehow is that his ancestors gave him that information somehow to recognize their their DNA togetherness.
yeah, I think honestly, I mean, I know that's how he views it. And I kind of want to respect his thinking on that for sure. Um, and I guess I want it to be that way, if that makes sense. Like it's a little bit more meaning to what I do. As I said, I work with the ancestors, work with the dead a lot, and I feel like that whether or not it's true, I cannot prove it as a scientist, but at least right now, though I will definitely note. But I do think that there's something there that was really pushing him, and if it were me, I would say it was the ancestors, through DNA or whatever medium. I don't even know. So
Well, part part of your problem is you're both skeptical and open to weird stuff, as your books
yeah,
recognize.
that's a very fair point.
So why don't we just run over to the weird part of your mind here for a minute? Uh, because we're going in that direction and talking about part of your book that fascinated me. The,
Mhm.
the let's say his ancestors somehow played a role in this. If you were to like write one of your science fiction kind of maybe close to reality, because this is close to reality because it happened.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, yeah,
A low probability event, a coincidence, a synchronicity, a very meaningful one to both you and to him,
definitely.
which imbues meaning after upon meaning when it's shared by each of you and for maybe different reasons. So it's a strong meaning in this synchronicity for each of you.
Totally.
Let's now venture into the kind of thinking that is behind this book,
I have my copy here too. So
and you have your copy too. Is this backwards when I read this? Show this to you?
No, actually,
Huh.
it's right ways around. So yeah.
Okay, it's backwards to me. So this is you've got, but put yours up there just to put just to have it kind of resonating with each
Mine
other.
is backwards to me too, though. So I don't know if it's the right way around for you.
You're no, we got it. So anyway, put it up, put it over in front of your face so we can have them like right next to each other, like this. Yeah. Okay, so that's a coincidence right there that we just
Yeah,
created one.
totally.
We
How
just
about the coincidence people can buy some of those, buy a couple of copies if they want. So
can buy a couple copies
yeah.
if they want. Um, so now we've brought out your uh, stranger than fiction. Well, anyway, we brought out the possibilities that your book suggests could be hiding into the future and probably I think going on right now. Um, when you put on that side of your mind or your brain, talk a little bit more about how it might have happened with this man, the maternal DNA and ancestors or something else.
So if I was to combine like the book um with this scenario, the way that the book works is that there are individuals who are given basically images of things that they need to make happen. And that is what allows them to basically create a coincidence or reveal some truths or something along those lines. So in this instance, it would basically be some way of nudging the individual that, you know, hey, you really need to be paying attention to this cave, to these individuals, something's going on here. They don't necessarily have contact with individuals from the beyond in the book, but the well in books 2 and 3 it gets into a lot more of like how they're given these messages and like how they're supposed to be doing these sorts of things, and that definitely would be at play there with the individuals, the ancestors themselves, but in a fictional world. But we'll see basically in this book, you know, that they would be pushing the individual to go and look into this more, to really petition for getting DNA work done, getting this sort of analysis completed, doing their own DNA even would also be part of it, because, or analyzing their own DNA, knowing their own lineage, because, well, there's a lot of people that don't and or don't want to or are worried about it. And if they don't have that information, well, I can't link them with an unknown. So that sort of thing would definitely be playing a role here. I'm hoping that's what you were meaning. So
Well, it's in the direction. One thing that was missing for me in your book was just how they got the information to do the coincidences that they did, and they wondered about that. So now you're saying they get images, and your second and third book after this one talk about maybe where the images come from, but at least somehow they get the people, the two heroes, the heroine and the hero, the two heroes in the book, get images about what they are supposed to do, how what coincidences they're supposed to create. And
yeah.
that was kind of what I was looking for in this book that I got, but it wasn't there. But now you're bringing it up. So how did they, in books 2 and 3 after this, how were the images delivered, or you don't want to talk about that because it's in the book, you got to read about it? Why don't you just give us
No,
some idea
actually,
about
yeah.
it?
There are a couple instances where they do get images in the book. And the first one, it's a little bit more abstract, I would say. So, in general, they tend to get kind of like a mental image. And it's not like your typical memory that you might be able to pull up and um I don't know, I've been kind of fascinated lately with the inner mind's eye and like how some people have very vivid ones and some people don't. It's a completely different subject, but I'm fascinated with it. But in this instance, what they're getting is a very vivid image that is basically presented to them. I kind of describe it as like a glossy face magazine image, basically something that would be very detail oriented, that they could basically manipulate in their own mind to be able to establish what's going on. Often within the images, they are going to be like certain aspects that are highlighted, literally. So in certain aspects that are going to allow for them to know, oh, this is kind of the individual that I'm supposed to be targeting. But often it's kind of abstract in the sense that they are still also having to piece together what those images mean. They may not mean necessarily what they think at the first glance, the first look. they actually need to investigate to further gather what those are going to be. A very low stakes one that I can share would be like from the third book. There's an image that they're given of a little boy who needs to get to school on time. They have no idea why. And it seems very, very odd. They're like, they are in a scenario where it would behoove them to just completely ignore it, not pay attention, but it actually turns out to be extremely important for them to make sure that this happens for reasons that don't involve the kid, that have to do with the larger scenario. So that's just kind of how that goes in this world.
Well, the idea that they get an image, it's not uncommon for human beings in the regular world to get an image about what they might be doing into the future. Uh, and,
Absolutely.
and it comes from someplace, and some people might call it precognition. They have a sense for but it's ambiguous. Uh,
Yes.
and and you have to then like figure out what it is. Sometimes it can be more specific, but it can be ambiguous. So what you're describing as an image coming from someplace is consistent, not the same probably, as what you're describing in the other books after this, and maybe the first one too. You have to figure out, you have to fill in the spaces,
Mhm.
do some experimenting, push things around to see actually what you're supposed to be doing. So it's kind of a precognitive variant that you're describing there, but you're saying it comes from someplace else. Uh,
Yeah,
do you describe where it comes from?
I do, but I'm not going to get into that because that is a bit spoilery.
Well,
But yeah.
that's what I was curious about because it was kind of alluded to in that
Yes,
book. But where does it
definitely.
come from? I'm going to say for the purposes of this discussion, it's kind of like precognition that
Yes, it
we
definitely is. Mhm.
kind of, and that means time gets to be more flexible than we usually think it to be. Uh, and so it's close to what the regular reality we have uh, already has, and
Absolutely.
that and so that's why it's, I think for you to make this distinction between the science fiction and your real science thinking is a false dichotomy, because I think what you're doing, as many authors have done, is intuitively picking up what can be. Uh,
Yeah.
and that's why I'd like to put them together, because it's both, I do both science and intuitive things, and that's what you're doing.
I
I,
entirely agree. Yeah, I feel that I noticed there are some very common themes in my work, and a lot of it, like I think I said, in my bio was like I like the real world with a twist. I I like to explore that unknown boundary there, and while like the day-to-day work I do is very cut and dry, identifying people, things like that. But there is a lot that goes into our understanding of death, our anthropological way that we address reality, things like that I get fascinated with, and I think that those are not not going to be separate things in my brain. Like I think that they very much come together, and I get to explore them with a little bit more fun in a book, a little bit more dry and scientific in my day-to-day identifications or analyses that I'm doing. So
but you like to have fun and you like to explore, and that's what you get to do. But I think you're doing scientific research with writing these books. Besides having a good time telling stories and having female heroines, female take
yeah.
care of business people, which you like a lot too. And there's other, it satisfies some other things that are fun for you. But
Mhm.
you're looking in, you're looking into the future that is now, is what I'm suggesting. And this
Yeah.
DNA thing where that you described becomes maybe it's what you described, ancestors are involved or something else is involved, but you uh, you're picking up something here and raising a
Yeah.
question that is
Mhm.
a science fiction question, perhaps, but it isn't because it happened right in front of you. And so
Yeah.
ancestors, you got to listen to them, and you are.
Yeah, I definitely do my best, right? Ancestors or DNA, exactly. I don't know what, but I definitely endeavor to make sure that I'm paying attention. and listening as best I can. Am I as attuned as I know I have a couple of students that I feel like are deeply attuned to being able to listen to that side of things far better than I feel like I listen to them on that end. But there's definitely something there that resonates, whatever it may be.
Well, I'll say that you got images put in your head about what you needed to do to create this coincidence. That I,
That's fair, totally.
I'll say that because the idea that you are and I are talking is very connected to this friend of mine who's written a book on DNA, and that DNA is not anything static, it's vibrating. It's got a
True.
certain resonance to it. The DNA, everything is vibrating around us in various levels of frequency. And what she suggests very simply is that the DNA in your sample and what you found resonated with the DNA of the man whose DNA was connected to them, and he could pick up in a way that we have yet to clarify, which she
Yeah.
talks about, that he recognized in some kind of DNA connected resonance that this was something similar to his own.
I definitely think, yeah, there's something there. Definitely. I like that idea. I can't prove it, obviously, at this point, but who knows? Somewhere down the line, someone hopefully will be
Or
able to say, yeah, what's going
you
on
might be
there?
looking at her book sometime too,
Yeah, yeah,
and,
no, definitely. I'm like, I'm gonna have to
and
check that out just because it sounds
proving
very
it.
fun.
You don't have to prove the stuff in your books, and that's what's nice
Right,
about it.
that's true. I
So
don't have to, and that's lovely.
so this is a transition zone for you, this DNA resonance thing. Well,
Yes, absolutely.
uh, moving on to another fascinating part of your book is the two main characters uh, having been together for century after century and not getting much older, but having lots of experiences together. They're a team of coincidence makers making stuff happen in various real worlds, have a very strong telepathic connection.
Yes,
And
totally.
this is a view into the future, I think, that's going on now, where two people recognize they have telepathic capacities with each other. How did you come to that? And also, how do you advise people now, even though you haven't done it, but you have? How do you advise people who are in love with each other or in somehow connected, as these two
Yeah.
people were,
Oof.
to manage the capacity of interpersonal telepathy?
That's a good question. I will say that any advice I give comes with a caveat that I'm not well, I'm not a psychologist, so, or a psychiatrist or any of that. But I will say that, back to the book, that the idea of the two individuals, Amy and Luke, being telepathic, was actually came not at the first. I was actually riding along, and the idea hit me between the eyeballs one afternoon, and I sat down, and the book kind of just honestly wrote itself. It was very unarduous. A lot of books that I get stuck in the middle. I have plenty of unfinished drafts lurking on my hard drive. But I will say that this one just basically poured out. And when I got to the first scene when they were working together, and they had to be in like they can go invisible as part of the plan here, in the sense that they need to be able to do that to be able to make coincidences happen. It's just part of their ability. And then I realized that they couldn't talk to each other. So there was an element there of like, oh wait, this is necessary for the two of them to be able to actually carry out a conversation. And it was actually there's a scene at the very close to the beginning of the book where they are breaking into one of the individuals who they'd seen in this image, um, her house, to get more information on her and to see what they needed to do to like kind of nudge things along. And they're sitting there trying to open the door, and I was like, oh well, these two people can't talk. How am I going to do this? And that actually then brought this idea to mind, of them being telepathic with one another. And actually ended up rewriting parts at the beginning to be able to allow for that to work. And um, I kind of loved it, especially because of the very parts of this book. Amy, the female who the book is told from her perspective, she really struggles with like keeping that boundary between the two of them up. And it's mainly because, in my mind, because the two of them are very connected. They've always been connected. She loves him, but thinks that he doesn't care for her. And then there's just this drama between the two of them. But it allowed for me to explore a little bit more into what would you do in this scenario? Like, how would you go about dealing with somebody that could be in your thoughts. And I think that there's been a lot of other books, that I've read. I always think of, oh my gosh, now the name is going to completely escape me, but the older book where they are telepathic. Oh, I'm gonna have to look that up. It's now completely gone. And like they really portray it as kind of an awful thing. And there's some elements of that, like where if you're in somebody's thoughts, you really want to protect like what you're thinking. How do you do that in the same scenario? But also how it can be extremely useful for making two individuals closer and allow for them to actually like share at a deeper level with one another. I will admit I am not telepathic. I occasionally do, have experiences for sure where you're like, oh my gosh, like you just said what I was thinking. This happens all the time with my husband. Like it's kind of to the point of being kind of creepy every once in a while. But in terms of utilizing that then for their relationship, I think it only serves to strengthen it, to allow for them to realize that they're on, my family always use on the same wavelength. And I don't know if I'd have any advice with people that could do that, except that lean into it. It makes things fun, really. It makes things interesting. And also, in a lot of instances, demonstrates to individuals that like there's maybe more there than they're realizing. Whether it be like true coincidence that doesn't have any meaning, or whether it be meaningful. I imagine it depends on the scenario. But yeah, I'm just thinking like this weekend, my husband and I were headed out to go run an errand, and I've been sitting there thinking, I want to grab we get this like an iced drink from our favorite coffee shop here in town, and I was thinking, oh, we should go get one of those. And literally, as I was thinking it, he said, "You want to grab one of those?" And it was great. Now, yeah, so that was definitely super fun. But I don't know in terms of other ways to utilize that. I imagine there's quite a few, but it's hard for me to fully imagine. As much as I spend time in Luke's and Amy's heads, I hope I'm doing it justice.
Well, you wrote a lot about it in the book, I thought. Uh, and part of the issue was, are we being telepathic now? Can he or she know what I'm thinking now?
Mm-hmm.
And can they not? So there was a boundary question about how permeable that boundary was between the two of them. So from partly your own experience in the real world, but in the book more so, how would you suggest that people who are telepathically connected, how would you suggest they manage that capacity between them to keep a boundary and also to know when they're able to communicate?
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good question. I'm definitely sitting here thinking, and like the first thing that goes through my mind is definitely utilizing it to keep on the same page, especially, I don't know, even with a silly example of getting drinks this weekend. If you want something to happen, make sure you're thinking it at them. But making sure that you're laying that groundwork on that level with that other individual. But I do think otherwise, like it does teach us a little bit about our thoughts in the sense that we need to be more mindful of them. I think that that's something that is at least something that I got a lot when I was a kid. I don't know if some other biases in that, but definitely like realizing that, okay, well, if you want to make sure that you're being careful with your thoughts, because and with like being able to communicate them to somebody else, be sure that you're being careful with yourself. Like don't allow yourself to spiral out of control. I have very severe anxiety. And I think that definitely is something that I've had to really learn, is how to rein in my thoughts. And I think that also would apply in this scenario where like if you don't want to blast somebody with just absolute nonsense out of your head, be able to learn how to control and how to maintain your own um, equilibrium, I guess would be the best way I can think of to put it personally, and how that would then allow for you to best influence and best communicate with those around you. Um,
I think that's so important, Meredith. So important. Be Once you recognize that your thoughts can influence the mind of someone else and who picks up your thoughts as well as the feelings that go with them, that requires you, out of love for that other person, to manage your thoughts and their feelings much better than you might have.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good motivator, I feel like, for getting your own mind under control, right? Like I feel like that's something that a lot of people struggle with these days. And I think honestly, one of the best motivators to make sure that you aren't struggling with it as much is to like know that like yeah, it has a lot of impact on those around you, and or especially individuals you might be more linked with, like me and my husband. God knows that if I'm struggling with like especially like spiraling thoughts, like I know that it gets him as well. Like there's just no doubt.
Are you saying that you recognize that even now, that your thoughts can influence how other people are feeling, even in regular life?
I think that in a lot of ways, yeah. I try to keep a lid on it, I guess, if that makes sense. Keep my boundaries up so that it doesn't as much. Um, but like I'm in the public eye a lot. And maybe not super public, like I'm not on TV and things like that, but in the sense that I am regularly interacting with a classroom, with students, with my fellow faculty. Like I don't spend a lot of my life alone. And I think that knowing that my thoughts not only influence my actions, but also can potentially then just create a really shitty energy. Pardon, I didn't realize, sorry. But that can definitely be something that I need to be mindful of. I need to be able to control my own emotion and my own thoughts to ensure that the environment around me is one that's supportive, and that I want it to be a good place for my students, that I want to be able to project that I'm not um I don't know, I'm really struggling with something, even though I might be on certain levels, but being able to ensure that those are not getting communicated out and my boundaries are up, if that makes sense.
Oh, it definitely makes sense. I heard you say was that your thoughts influence your energy, and that your energy can influence those around you.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely feel that. If I'm having a really lousy day and I know that my mind is just not in a good spot, I have to be mindful of the fact that that's absolutely putting out an energy to the room around me, and like I gotta make sure that I'm being careful about that. Um, and I think that that also definitely works in the book, but works in real life all the time. So yeah,
What works in real life is what you're talking about as energy.
yeah, totally.
And what's in the book is more precise
Yes.
than an energy in the sense of what's communicated. Although words have feelings and energy is associated with both of them, what we're talking about here is your husband knowing that you might want the cold drink from the coffee shop, or
Yeah.
thinking along with it as you are thinking the same thing. That's greater precision
Mhm.
about communication. So being able to say to someone who's there with you or not, it was someplace else, uh, I'm going over here, or this is what's happening to me, or this is what I'm doing, and not use the phone or texting to do that. That's has more precision to that.
Yeah.
In the book, what are the kinds of telepathic messages that they communicated with each other?
So there's a lot of different messages. They can't see what the other one is seeing. That is definitely something that sometimes I wish I had written a little different, because that would certainly make things easier later in the next couple of books. But no, they are very much limited to just language, and just words, as well as inflection in them. They're not like something they're reading on like a text message, right? It's something that it's their voice being transmitted, and they transmit a lot of information about where they are, what's going on, what the other person that they're watching. Like often there's a couple of different ends of the coincidence that they're trying to bring together, and so like one might be on one individual, and the other main character would be on the other person that they're watching, to kind of bring those two together. So they'll be communicating about what they're doing, how they're working with one another. And then also how they're interacting with other individuals in the scenario. Like in the book, they deal with another pair of coincidence makers, but the two pairs cannot communicate with each other. They can only communicate within the pair. And that definitely makes things interesting, because there's a lot of nuance that goes on between Luke and Amy about the other coincidence maker pair, how they're feeling about them, how the scenarios unfolding. And so being able to actually have that sort of background conversation is actually kind of pertinent to the two of them, in terms of being able to push things forward. And I think that I will be honest, if you know, if I was actually telepathic with my husband, that would be extremely handy to be able to be like, okay, I want to get out of this scenario. Please end this conversation. And I do know that like I can uh nudge him in that way, but it would be certainly nice to just be able to say it outright in his head. So
That would be a conversation where the two of you are in the same place together.
yes, that's true. Yeah, this is not limited by space. That is between Luke and Amy. Um, yeah, in terms of being able to communicate over long distances, that would also be super helpful, but that is definitely something that Luke and Amy can do. They do not have to be in one another's presence.
Yeah, and that's part of the point of that. But it would
Mhm.
start with feeling say you're in a conversation with your husband with some people you want to get out of, and he could feel that you want to stop it. Uh,
Yeah.
with someone that I'm very close with and very sensitive to, I could tell she'd had enough of a foursome conversation that we were in just by her nonverbal, but it was also the energy coming off of her that I could tell it was enough. It was not, it was a combination of things, but I was also feeling it. And
Yeah.
so, okay, I said that's enough. And the conversation ended. Uh, so it's the rudimentary basics are there already for you and your husband, and for many other people who are watching and listening to this, to be able to expect that to someone that you're close with. Close means you're able to communicate more information in less, uh, in fewer bits, I'll
Yeah.
say. Uh, so
Yeah.
so it can come up faster, so it's condensed. And so you are setting the stage, Meredith, for people to believe that it's possible, including you with your husband.
Yeah.
That if you believe it's possible, it makes a big difference that you can.
Yeah, sorry, didn't. No, totally. I think that that's really true. I mean, you have to believe to be able to be sensitive to it, right? Like if you're not believing in it at all, you're not going to pick up on it. I will say that my husband is very much a non-believer of any of this sort of thing. And I'm always surprised when he does pick up on stuff, because I was like, oh, I was just thinking that, and like he just blows it off as not anything significant. But I'm always like, someday he'll figure this out, that like there is more there going on. Uh, but yeah, I would say that you have to believe in it to be able to make it work in even at any level. So, um, but yeah, that
At
definitely
any
is something
level.
to
And
be fun.
I'm talking to you, Meredith,
Mhm.
because you wrote the book, and I'm
Yeah.
saying you don't even believe it either. And it's and
Well, yeah.
and
I do want to believe in it. I guess that's the thing that I think distinguishes me between me and a lot of non-believers who like my husband, who are like, I don't want to believe in that. I don't think it's real. It's not worth my energy. But I'm always like, well, that would be super interesting if it were. And I want to explore that idea more. Um, because I definitely have seen instances or snippets of it in my own life. So even with just cold drinks from the coffee shop. So
yeah, it, it And for our audience, and especially for you, Meredith, when you write about something the way you did, you kind of believe it's already happening. And
Yeah.
by writing about it, you make it more real for yourself and for
Yeah.
those who are reading about it. So it's just fun to be thinking from my perspective how you're fooling yourself into fooling yourself that this is like maybe real when you think it's
That's
not.
totally fair. I love that. Absolutely. No, for sure. When I'm in this book world, when I write, I'm very much like in the scene, right? Like they're doing the things with characters and it's very much a real aspect in that process. And it's probably the reason why I like writing so much is that ability to kind of like get absorbed into a world where this is something that's more real. I don't know. I don't even know if that's actually a good way of putting it.
Well, I'm encouraging you to think of it as more real, and
Yeah.
that you're this is research that Meredith Houston Snow is doing by writing these books. This is we you know, I think I know from my own experience that by writing I learn.
Yeah,
Um,
yes.
and if you write from your own intuition like this, and it just pours out of you, that's what you said about this
Yeah,
book.
it did
Yeah, it
very
pours
much.
out. Where's that coming from anyway? Well, like, what am I tuning into? I mean, I'm downloading this, people call it, but most people don't write stuff down, and it was coming through to you. So this is this for our listeners and viewers, but especially for you. You're writing about what can be and probably what is. So that's that's part of the discussion here, so that we become more practical about what probably can happen. And one of my questions continues to be not about first how they communicate. And you said they communicate through voices. Do they communicate through images? Yes, the two of them. Could they, can they see what the other
No, they
person is seeing?
cannot.
No,
Yeah, they can't see each other's what their other one's seeing, and I
they
seriously
don't.
kind of wish I had made that be the case because there are days when I'm like, make my life in story telling these stories a little bit easier. When I first started, but no, like the way that it made the most sense to me when I first started writing and how like the kind of the world came to me was that they can't do that. It's only voice. They have to
Only,
describe, only can
well,
talk.
you're just doing audio, not visual. That's all.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
No,
your
I
problem.
haven't done the visual side of it.
The future of efficient communication with telepathy will be uh, a movie with a soundtrack and
Yeah.
talking, because the pictures tell you more information. Pictures are maybe worth 1,000 words, I say, but the narrative along with the pictures gives you a lot more than just the audio itself. So that you are saying it, you are doing it, and we're just talking about the future.
Yeah, no, totally. And honestly, you know what? As I'm sitting here, I'm thinking, again, my cell phone's sitting on the desk here with me. Um, in certain ways, we are already on that path in the sense that like I send my mom and my sister videos regularly, or my mom sends us little videos of what she's up to, you know. Um, and I feel like in a lot of ways, especially like with close relationships between me and my siblings and things, that we're kind of on that path where like we can utilize this technology at this point to do these sorts of things already. And texting, well, you know, or voice texting, I should say, is very much what I kind of think of the way that Luke and Amy are communicating. And that, you know, as technology increases as well, that I think that we'll see a lot more of this. It's very much just like a connection. It's a way to communicate that is a lot more nuanced, I guess is the best way to put that.
And immediate.
Yeah, yeah, very, yeah. Some days a
More
little too immediate. So
sometimes a little too immediate. The, I'm of the opinion that our technology is develops to be able to tell us what we can do on our own.
that yeah, I would agree entirely, or enhance what we can already do in some ways, like that it's there and it's
Enhance
something
what
that
we
we
can do.
want to be able to do better. Yeah. No,
And
totally.
and when you pick up the phone, that's a reflection of you can do audio, video, audio and video. So that's that's the that this potential is there of telepathic communication between people. And I think you have to have a good relationship, I think, in that for that to happen. But some people get too wide open and will pick up too much from their
Mhm.
environment and hear other people talking and what they're feeling, and it makes them crazy. And some of them see the future of too many different people, and that makes them crazy because they get flooded. So there's a need to turn off the phone and to block the thing. And here I'm asking you, interpersonally, two people again, like Luke and Amy, they have to not always be in communication with each other as people in the future might have with their own telepathic capacities with each other. How do
Mhm.
you how do you manage the boundary but when people are that able to communicate with each other?
Yeah, actually Amy has a really hard time in the book of being able to do that. Like she really struggles with keeping like the wall up. And she does get better over that, I will say, over the next couple of books, where basically it has to be a very intentional action. And I think that that's something like that also applies to the real world, right? Like if you are really attempting to make this connection work, well, of course you have to believe in it, and also then you have to make it intentional. And I think that that is what is the key behind a lot of what's in the book and what I view in my own personal life, even though admittedly like cold drinks from the coffee shop may not have been super intentional, but it's certainly something I wanted. So um I think that allows for um I guess us to be able to be more cognizant of those around us, and to be able to put up our own walls or make sure that we're being not flooded, like you said. So,
And
yeah.
how do you do that? By being intentional?
I think that for me personally, it's being very mindful of my thoughts. I think that for me, I have to be very careful about that. I will also be honest, I take some anxiety medication that really helps me keep myself from spiraling, because I do know that like that is my brain's natural chemistry to do that. And I don't enjoy it. Nobody around me enjoys it. And I don't think that it allows me to have the intentionality that I want to be or want to have. And I think that uh, otherwise, it's basically just being very cognizant and pointed. So I hope you cannot hear my dog Jerry, who is very, very old and blind, is currently giving me a lot of grief. He wants to be pet, so I'm hoping he's not getting picked up on the microphone. So
The intentionality comes back again to managing your own thoughts. But
well, in my opinion, yeah.
even if you manage your own thoughts, how do you keep from broadcasting them to somebody else in the fictional
In the
world?
fictional world, I think that for Amy and Luke, it's very much that like they have to actually like don't describe this in a great deal of detail, and it's making me think that that should be something that I bring up in a future book. But it very much has to be something that they like kind of direct at somebody, I guess, kind of like a God, this is gonna sound silly, like a laser beam. Like you kind of like shoot it at them, and that is something that then they can allow for it to be more specific and more targeted, and not just kind of like a leaky barrier that's allowing things to seep through. But otherwise, it's very much needs to be um, thought with intention toward the other individual. Yeah.
Thought with intention toward the other individual, this person I
Yeah.
love very much, instead of just thinking I love her.
Yeah.
When I think it, I I love you, imagining that my heart energy goes to her. And I don't
Yeah.
know if it gets to her, but sometimes I think it might. But that's
Mhm.
at least better than just keeping it within myself to send that to her. Uh, and
Yeah, absolutely. Mhm.
there's another element to this. So if I'm sending this heart energy, or or Luke or Amy is sending information to the other one, uh, the other person has to be willing to pick up the phone.
Yes. Yeah. Uh-huh. I totally was thinking that. Yeah. Yeah. If they can't, or there's just a complete wall up, right? Or whatever that might represent. It's not going to get through.
It's not going to get through. And so I saw science fiction, I think I was on Netflix, where you thought of someone to call.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was very much like hitting the number on the phone,
Yeah.
but you didn't do it with the phone. You say hit their number, and it was a certain vibration connecting with the other person, but the other person had to open the phone, had to turn it on.
Yep.
And on the other side of that, there has to be a capacity to block certain people from getting into your head.
Yes.
So
Totally.
this becomes a focus of training to be able to learn how to be interpersonally telepathic. There's a lot of elements to it. And I
Oh
think
yeah, absolutely.
and we've just gone over them, and I think this is wonderful that we did, because we're coming to the end of our discussion of
Yeah.
this, and I'm so glad you brought that up in your book, because it is Meredith Houston looking to the future of what is already going on now and potentially now, and being able to manage it in a way that becomes useful and not overwhelming is part of the challenge of what you've introduced.
Yeah, the more that I think about this and discuss this with you, it really does make me realize, like, I have struggled with this my whole life in terms of keeping my thoughts kind of in check, and I think that that's definitely what's playing out in this, in the sense that I have to be very mindful of that, and try not to wander off into a spiraling thoughts land, and that is definitely something that I um recognize the importance of. And that's probably what's playing in then to Luke and Amy's scenario here too. So
Yes, yes, yes. For the artist, the
mhm.
artwork is a confession.
Yes, always. It really is. Sometimes I don't like to think about that, but it's not always really a good one, but it is fun.
It's the way we learn stuff.
Yeah.
Um, Meredith, do you have any last words you'd like to leave for our audience?
Um, well, I'm gonna just say thank you first of all. This was lovely. I really enjoyed this discussion. I will say that the Coincidence Makers, the first and second book are out, but they will be re-releasing on April 18th and May 16th. And then the third book, which has not been released yet, will be released in June. Um, so yeah, if anybody's looking to pick those up, they will have new covers. So this cover is not actually the final one. My publishing house got bought out by another publishing house, and so they're giving them new covers. So that's what's up. But I hope that people might pick one of those up or shoot me an email. I'm always available, always happy to chat. And my email is on my website. So
And the website will be on our blurb about you, so they can pick that up there too. But you
awesome.
can go
Yeah,
to
no,
Meredith.
definitely.
You go to Meredith if you spell it right, Meradeth. Meredith. If you
Yeah.
spell it right, you can Houston. That's easy. You can also find her just by putting that in there too, and find her
Yeah. The
website.
first name spelling is phonetic, but it will also autocorrect to Megadeth if anybody is very, you have to be mindful of that. It does it to me occasionally, and it's really annoying. But
Really
if you like
annoying.
80s hair bands, that will be what you'll get there. So
Well, Meredith Houston or Meredith Houston Snow, thank you for being with me, and thanks for doing this book. It's really fun and educational about what I think is a future for humanity. In fact, it's probably what humanity did before we developed language. So
yeah,
that's probably what
I would like to love to think about that. Definitely. Oh, I teach human evolution class. That's a whole other subject. So
that's all. Oh yeah, it's a whole other subject. Well, thanks again, Meredith.
thank you. This is great. I appreciate it. Have a good day.
Thank you.
This psychosphere is our mental atmosphere, like a hologram of cosmic consciousness.